Hello everyone, welcome to Read Through the Word. Today is Saturday, September 28th. I hope you're doing great. You might have noticed that I am in a bit of a different spot than usual. I noticed somebody had said, hey, we didn't recognize where Dawn was. You are correct. So I actually normally do my teaching in a little closet. That's kind of my space where it's quiet. Due to some just different crazy things over the past couple weeks, my closet's not available, so I am moving things out here and just for a short time. And hopefully you can still hear me okay. Hopefully the sound is still good. So welcome to my living room today. So today our lesson is called In Spirit and in Truth, and we're talking about a story from John chapter 4 that a lot of you have probably heard many times before. It's a pretty well-known story. And if you haven't heard it, welcome and to this kind of very interesting story. And I hope that it sparked a lot of questions and thought, and very inspiring too, the love of Jesus, as we see the love of Jesus worked out in the way he interacts with people. So actually, for a project that I was doing, I kind of had to do like a deep dive into this story and do a bunch of research. And I just found so many cool things. And I really found, I think that there's really just been one sort of, I guess, approach to this story that I've heard most of my life, and really just that approach to this story. But when I dug into it, I found some really different things that gave me a different perspective, and I really appreciated that. I don't know about you, but as a student of the text, when we want to be a good student of the Word, it's being open to looking into a text and saying, have I missed something? Is there something new? Is there something different? Or is there something more that can add to the story? Or what does the original language say? Or what does this say in relation to another piece of text? We're always learning, aren't we? That is the great thing about the Bible. We're always learning. So I want to share today a little bit with you about kind of what I found with this story. And so obviously we know from John chapter 4 that Jesus and his disciples, they're headed from Judea to Galilee, and we know that Jews avoided generally the route through Samaria and usually went along the eastern side instead. But Jesus chose to travel through the region of Samaria. Isn't that just like Jesus, right? Like, I'm not doing things the way it's always been done. And he comes to the small village of Sychar near Shechem at the foot of Mount Gerizim, near the plot of ground where Jacob had given to his son Joseph. That's from John 4 chapter 5, or chapter 4, verse 5. There, during the hot midday sun, Jesus encounters a Samaritan woman at the well there. So all my life, I have really been taught that this story demonstrates that Jesus wasn't afraid to talk to this very sinful woman. And that was kind of the point of the story. But the conversation between Jesus and this woman actually seems to have very little, if anything, to do with whether she was sinful or not. So Jesus does tell her that she's living with a man who's not her husband. We don't know who that is. And it does say she's had previous husbands. So could her current relationship be an illicit one? It absolutely could. That is absolutely possible. But there are other possibilities too. So in ancient Israel, only a man could initiate a divorce. Men were legally allowed to divorce their wives for adultery, but they were also allowed to divorce their wives for even frivolous reasons, or even being childless or barren. This woman could have been barren and possibly discarded by each husband. That is a possibility. Maybe she was mistreated by men. We do know that Oftentimes women got married very young, and sometimes it was, arranged. A lot of times it was arranged by families. It could be very contractual. So perhaps she had gotten into a relationship that wasn't good, and it just kind of spiraled from there. We don't know. Okay. And is that some speculation? Of course. But the point is that we can't say with certainty that Jesus's conversation was fully to point out her sin either, because we don't know the whole story behind this woman's relationships. And this not fully knowing matters, right? It matters what we know and what we don't know. Here's what we do know. In going back in history a little bit here, so the rift between Samaritans and Jews went back as far as 722 BC, when the king of Assyria forced his people to settle in Israel after most Israelites were exiled. The remaining Israelites intermarried with them, and their worship sometimes intermingled with pagan practices as well. In the 4th century BC, Samaritans built their own temple on Mount Gerizim and largely viewed themselves as faithful descendants of Israel. The archaeological Bible says the proper place of worship had long been a source of debate between Jews and Samaritans. Samaritans held that Mount Gerizim was especially sacred. They had built a temple there in about 400 BC, which the Jews destroyed in 120 BC. So this act sealed a permanent rift between the two communities, and to a large extent underlies the hostility between Jews and Samaritans reflected in the New Testament. So there was an animosity there, like, we built a temple, this is the true place of worship, and it was taken away. Now, despite these animosities, Jesus opens up this conversation with this woman and asks her for a drink. Now, Jews would absolutely become ceremonially unclean if they drank from a vessel handled by a Samaritan. So this woman is understandably confused. A Jewish man stops in the middle of the day at a well, talks to her, asks her for a drink, and then says that he can give her water that will make her never thirst. Then he tells the woman about her life. In other words, he makes her feel known. What if he was saying, I know what you've been through? So this Jewish man, right, is not afraid to talk to her, somehow knows about her life. And the Samaritan woman's answer is so overlooked sometimes. She says, I can see you're a prophet. Now, she doesn't talk about her sin. She says, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. She's not replying about her sin or her husband's or her life. She's talking about the heartache of not being able to worship at the temple. This response also tells me I'm not sure that this conversation is about her sin. This conversation feels like it's about spiritual connection. She wasn't able to access the temple in Jerusalem, and she felt cut off from true worship. And Jesus responds to her, believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. John 4:21-24. So the Samaritan Bible contained only the Pentateuch, and Samaritans worshiped the true God often, but their failures to accept much of his revelation meant they knew little about him. Though Samaritans did not embrace teaching beyond the Torah, they still had hopes in a coming Messiah who would restore their sanctuary. It would restore them and their sanctuary. So an ancient Samaritan document states, let the restorer come safely and sacrifice a true offering. The restorer will come in peace and reveal the truth. Then let's read John 4:25. The woman said, I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. That sounds a lot like that ancient Samaritan document that reflected their beliefs at that time, that the restorer would come and reveal the truth, explain everything. So she knew a restorer was coming. And Jesus' reply to her is, I who speak to you am he. In other words, he's saying, right, I'm the living water. You have access to me in spirit and truth, and no one can take that away from you. And again, I love the part where Jesus says, worshiping the Father in spirit and truth, they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. And so this woman, who for whatever reason has had so much heartache in life, and who feels so cut off from the presence of God and true worship. And Jesus breaks a lot of, Jewish protocol. He breaks Jewish protocol, goes through Samaria, breaks down barriers, and says to her, you get to worship me in spirit and in truth. You will not be cut off from me. My presence is with you, and you can find true worship in me. No one, no matter if a temple is torn down, taken away, you don't have access to it, it doesn't matter. You have access to me. And that's really the point of this story. The point of this story is that this woman could have undergone any number of situations. We don't ultimately know. But I think we can safely say that the idea that this story is all about just addressing this woman's sin does not always fully fit with what we see in the rest of the text. And again, we don't know for sure, but I've just been so encouraged by looking at other parts of this story and seeing the possibilities of how Jesus approached this woman and the truth and the life that he brought to her by letting her know she did not need a temple. She did not need anybody's acceptance. She did not need anything apart from Jesus, and that nothing would stop her from worshiping Jesus in spirit and in truth. What a great promise. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. Thanks for being with me here today, and we'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.